What is up, everybody? Today we are going to be rebuilding a manual steering gearbox. So I already have it taken apart here. These are quite simple to service once they are out of the steering column. I have another video on how to actually get the steering column out of the car, things like that. But like I said, this is already taken apart, but they're quite simple to take apart. So if you don't know how to take one apart, you can watch this video and you'll know how to take it apart and reassemble it and service everything. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll take this felt washer. This goes at the base of where the steering column shaft is. I don't remember if this is on every single year, but if you have one, we're going to drop this in some gear oil and just let that soak there. What that is, my gear oil, I'm using Valvoline Synchromesh manual transmission fluid. This is not hypoid oil. In other words, it does not smell like sulfur. Now on these, I'm pretty sure you can use hypoid oil. I don't think there's any brass in them. Likewise, I've seen people use automatic transmission fluid. You could even use motor oil if you want, like 40, 50 weight motor oil, but you may as well just get the good stuff. Also, this is what you want if you have a manual transmission car. Now, that being said, if you have a manual transmission car, you've hopefully changed the fluid in it at some point, and you probably already got a gallon of Napa GL1. If you haven't done that yet, go ahead and get yourself a gallon of GL1, and that's what you use in the manual transmission and in this. Just to be clear, you cannot use that in a differential. You have to use the hypoid oil in the differential. But anyway, with that all out of the way, the first thing we're going to do is actually install our steering shaft. So we have these roller bearings, angular, roller bearings. So they have their cups here. So when I took this apart, I made sure to keep each one with its original cup. So I'll put that inside there. That's where that's going to go. So we can inspect this here. And we can see that it pretty much still has a mirror finish on it. Likewise, there's nothing suspicious about the rollers. They were in equivalent condition. That's what we want to see. If it has a dull finish, let me show you an example. This is the bearing out of a differential I rebuilt recently. You can see it has this dull finish on the bore there. Nothing mirrored about that at all. We can even sort of see the grain of the metal. So it's, clearly pretty worn. Likewise, our rollers have these kind of lines visible in them. So that's no good there. If you see any of that, you want to get some new bearings. So the first thing we're going to do is take our bearing. We're going to put it back in its cup there. Of course, if you replace the bearings, you have to drive out that cup. But if the bearings are good and you're just doing a basic kind of cleaning and service, you leave that cup in there. Now we're going to take our worm gear and install that. The worm gear always reminds me of some sort of wizard staff with how long it is and the fact that it has this nice scroll looking thing on the top. Anyway, I'm going to take my paintbrush and go ahead and smear some on the bearings. Really, I should have put it on the bearing cup before I set the cone in, but who's counting? It's also a convenient time. Whoops. Yeah, don't let that fall out. But we're going to take our felt washer, stick the shaft in there. Okay, good so far. Then we'll slide the felt washer on here. There we go. And we can just slide this thing right in. All the way across the workbench. There we go. Next, we're going to install our other bearing. We're going to, of course, put some lubricant on that. We'll get it on the end of the shaft here. We need to set the bearing preload properly. So what you need to do is we're going to temporarily reattach the steering wheel on the opposite end and figure out how much torque it takes to turn the steering wheel. And we're not really going to measure the torque directly. We're just going to measure the pull on the end of the steering wheel. So depending on the car, I think this is 1 to 8 ounces of pull on power steering. For manual steering, it is 1/2 to 1 pound. How that is adjusted is we have shims here. These are very basic. They're just gasket material, but it's different thicknesses. So how you have to adjust it, if you happen to pull one of these out, you want to measure all of them with a caliper and see how thick they are. If one of them's a 3 thou and your preload is, or like the force is a little too low, the preload's a little too low, then you can a lot of times pull out that 3/1000th shim and get it back into spec. If not, you have a little bit of work to do. So with mine, I happen to have a 13 and a 19. What I did is I took standard printer paper. This is like 4 or 5 thou thick. You can measure yours. There's also different types you can buy, so go ahead and measure yours. And I made 2 shims here. So I'm going to take out the 13 and install my 2, which should be like 9, let's say. So that'll add about 4 thou of preload, because when I measured this before, it was a little too low. If you didn't see my other video, that's okay. I'll show you when we're checking this here, and that's the same process to measure it the first time versus check it later. If you're doing this in the car, you just need to make sure that the pitman arm is disconnected. There's hardly any torque actually added with the sector gear in place, so I'm just going to leave it out for now. So, with that being said, which one of these is my... I think this is my 19. I'm going to double check with the caliper. On these, I like to use a torque wrench so that my tightening is accurate. You don't need a torque wrench in terms of just, in general, but because it's something that's adjusted with shims, if I happen to tighten it more one time and less another time or whatever, I don't know why this thing's putting up such a fight. Wasn't like that last time. Well, actually, yeah, that was pretty tight last time, I guess. I got that tapped into place just with some light hammer taps. Nothing too crazy. Now, oh, yeah, I went to go get my caliper. Okay, so we can measure these out here. So, that one is my 13. We'll set that aside. This one is my 19. And then these should be like 4 or 5 each. That's 5. Other one should also be 5. Did I drop it? I don't know where it went. Oh, there it is. Hiding from me. You won't fool me that easily. There we go. That's another 5. So we're taking our 13 and we're replacing it with 2 5s. Obviously that's 10. So we're doing a 3 thou less preload. So all we're going to do is take our stack here. Let me double check that this is my 19. Pretty sure it is. Actually, I didn't even realize. Sometimes you'll have shims connected. Oh, look at that. We have a 3 thou in here. No, that's a 6 thou. Never mind. And that's probably a 13. Okay. Big deal. Not really. We'll take our 2 shims and our other 2 shims. So 4 shims. And we'll just stack them all on here. The torque spec is 15 to 18 foot-pounds. So I have my torque wrench set at 200 inch-pounds. So there's a note in the service manual that you have to use either thread sealant or copper washers on these 2 because they are not blind. These 2 are blind. We'll get all of our holes lined up so we're not trying to tear our shims apart and tear our hair out, trying to do it when we're actually screwing the thing in for real, especially with these. These are literally made out of printer paper. These really thin ones, a 5 thou, 6 thou. The factory ones are a little more durable, but mine are really fragile, especially because they're already soaked with mineral spirits. So they'll be perfectly fine once we actually install them. But in terms of actually getting them on there, it can be a little annoying. By the way, this is for the horn wire, that tube. The 55 and 56 gearboxes are the same, except they do not have that because that's not where the horn wire goes. So we're going to tighten this in a crossing pattern, just like tightening a 4-lug. So I threw the steering wheel on, I spun it a couple revolutions, and now I'm going to retorque my bolts here. I don't know if they'll change just slightly, They really shouldn't change that much, but it's best practice to do this because it lets the bearings seat, even though they should basically already be seated. But there we go. Now we'll check it out. So that takes about, that's a pretty good amount of force to pull that. So we're looking at something like 2.5 pounds. So that means we did not use enough shims. So we have to either we have to recalculate, guys. So what we have right now is 13, 6, 5, and 5. We have another 13. So I could take out my 2 5s and put the 13 in. That would be the same amount that I originally had, which was a little too low. We could take out a 6 and a 5 and put a 13 in. All right, I got the shim pack readjusted. You want the weight of the scale to factor in. So we're just going to turn the scale on normally. The hook doesn't really weigh anything. Then hook it on. You can see the scale itself weighs 0.2 pounds. So we can see that the force to turn the wheel is right around 0.8 pounds, let's say. Specification, this is a manual steering car. It's between 1/2 and 1. This one auto locks the reading, so which is a little annoying. We can see it's around that 0.7 mark, so that is a perfectly good adjustment right there. And we'll move on with the rest of the build. Next up, we are going to install the pitman arm seal. There's really nothing to it. So the old one you pry out with a screwdriver. I'll show you where it is here. It's right here. The old one, you just pry it out. And the new one, we just drive in with a hammer. Now I should mention there are bushings here. Technically, if you suspect those are worn down, you can test fit your pitman arm here. But we can see there's some shininess there, but I really doubt there's any difference in the diameter of the pitman arm itself. Actually, you can see it's only worn on one side, which is unsurprising because that's where all the force is. So that reading, 1.248. Then on the unworn part, 1.249. And then on the worn part down here, sorry, that wasn't on camera, 1.247. So really nothing to it. And the thing is, because you have this unworn part in the middle, you can slide it down to one of the bushings and just wiggle that around in the middle. And that's perfectly fine right there. Just for fun, I'm going to measure it with the caliper, but probably my measurement error on the caliper, like the accuracy built in the caliper itself, is going to exceed what our actual amount of wear is realistically. Yeah, that measures as 1.254, which I would believe seems about the amount of play I noticed, but you pretty much almost never have to replace those. So to get our seal in here, we just set it in. Make sure so you have the sunk in area and the flat area. The flat area goes to the outside. That's a sunk in area. Flat area goes on like that. And we just take our hammer and tap it in place. Sometimes easier said than done, because as soon as you tap on one side, the other side likes to pop out. But come on now. If you want to, you can take some Permatex shellac gasket compound and coat the outer edge of the steel with that, but I really don't see it necessary because you can see all that green stuff's popping off there. That means we got a good seal around the edge there. Other slightly more elegant ways, you can grab a socket that fits the same size of that. So I have a socket of the appropriate size that just has a little side-to-side wiggle room. I can tap on the socket to make sure my seal is fully seated, but you can also pretty much eyeball it and see that it's the amount of distance between the seal and the groove is the same all the way around. So I know it's properly seated. So what I did first, this is sort of optional, I got some Scotch-Brite, and I was kind of rubbing in this kind of orbital pattern on this groove here. Now, hopefully this does not have the groove in the exact same place, but just in case it does, that'll help it seal a little better. As you can see, there's nothing really too crazy, and you want to make sure and take some brake cleaner or something and spray this, or spray it on a rag and wipe that thoroughly so you get all the old, wear particles off of that. So all we're going to do, let's move this out of the way. Set this down. Like I was saying before, take some of my oil, just put it on the shaft in front of the seal. So that'll get the seal lubed up as soon as we install it there. This needs oil as well. I'm going to do it after I install it. Of course, that also lubricates our bushings in there. There we go, nothing to it. Now, I have a convenient hole in my table so it doesn't stick out on me. Once you have that seal installed, you can just start adding gear oil. There we go, that'll be good for now. So whenever you have a gasket between a stamped metal surface and a machined metal surface, sometimes the stamped metal is not completely flat. So we use Permatex shellac gasket compound, and we will paint some of this on the stamped side to help the gasket seal a little better. You don't have to put this on too thick. We're going through something we can see through, but it's, you know, it's sort of on there. We're not doing that for the shim pack because it's like stamped metal, but this is flat. And you would never be able to work with the shims properly if you stuck one of them on with shellac compound. You want to always be able to take those off. With gaskets, they're usually going to stick anyway, so you may as well put this stuff on, which will definitely make them stick, but that's what we want. So what we have here is our special washer and bolt that slides in there like that. Come on, you. Okay. And then we've got our new gasket. It has one flat side. I just made this gasket myself. Nothing too special. I just made it out of 1/64 gasket material. The thickness of this one does not matter, unlike the other ones. So we set that on there. This one, so it's not reverse threaded, but instead of threading into, you're threading out of. So you have to unscrew, lefty-loosey in other words, and that will thread this into our cover here. So once you have it threaded down a certain amount, yeah, ooh, we just barely saved it. Okay, yeah, try not to let it slide out of the gear. Of course, we had our gasket come off, so let's get that hooked back on properly. Okay, there we go. All right, guys, so I went ahead and got our copper washers installed here. There's really nothing to it. I just took those screws out, put the washers on, and torque tightened everything back in the crossing pattern. Spun the shaft a couple of times, make sure everything was seated, torque tightened it again. The second torque tighten this time around, actually none of the screws even moved. Just FYI, I guess. So we're gonna go ahead and finish up with these screws here. And now once you get the screws piloted, you want to loosen this, and you'll see that cover. Probably could get a better camera angle here. So you want to keep unscrewing this, and you'll see that cover drop on. And then once the cover's on there, it'll take some more force to keep unscrewing it, and that's because you're actually lifting up the sector gear. So once you've lifted it up a couple of turns there, we can go ahead and get these all the way screwed down and torque tightened. Exact same way as before. There's nothing you need to like spin. You can just do the standard crossing pattern here. These have the exact same torque spec as the other screws because they're the same size of screw. So the next thing we need to do is adjust this to make the worm gear intersect slightly, not intersect, but have some slight interference with the sector gear. So this will adjust our sector gear. And what we want to do is have it where if you have manual steering, it is 1.5 to 2 pounds to pull it through the high spot. If you have power steering, it's about 12 ounces total. What does the high spot mean? So if I turn my shaft there and count the number of rotations in total that it can go, turn it back halfway exactly, that's where my high spot is. So what I'm going to do for the time being is screw this down in, and I'm looking through the port there. It doesn't really show on camera. Just to where my sector gear, just until that starts very slightly to increase. So they're slightly touching now. I'm probably off the high spot, as one tends to be. So it's probably going to be too high, but we'll just go from there. This is very easy to adjust. I'll show you. So I have this clamped back in the vise. I have my steering wheel mounted back on and turned all the way to one side. Of course, I mounted this conveniently where it's just level when I'm at one limit. That makes it easy to keep track of. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. We're at 5. That would be 5 1/4, 5 7/8 rotations. So to figure out where the middle is, it's half of that. So 2 15/16, basically 3. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, right? Like between here, this is where it was leveled at one point. That's where it ended at the other point. So this is our 15/16 here, but this is what it means to pull it through the high spot. We were exactly in the middle. So we might as well start and see what our reading is to begin with. Like I said, on this one, it's supposed to be 1.5 to 2 pounds. And that's where we are. We're at 1.56. Pretty good initial adjustment. Should I even tempt fate by tweaking it? So the thing is, this will kind of reseat as soon as you adjust that set screw. So I got my screwdriver and I'm turning the wheel so that the thing will jump up and kind of follow my set screw adjustments. Otherwise, you'll notice the set screw has some play in it, but as soon as you turn the wheel, then all the play is gone. In other words, if I loosen it slightly, then I can tighten it back up that same amount as long as the wheel has not been turned. But that's not what I want. I'll loosen it slightly, turn the wheel, and then I can't tighten it anymore without imparting torque. That's what I mean by the adjustments following me. It's following my screwdriver when I'm turning the wheel at the same time. So don't have to overthink it though. We'll just try it again. We're still up in the 2s. All right, guys, there's not too much left to show here. So I have this adjusted to my liking /2 specification. You have this star washer here. This one looks like it was put on backwards because it actually says this side out, and the tell, if yours isn't abused by some previous owner, is that it's actually coned and the coned side is out. So all we do is we put that on. This one happens to line up very nicely with this already. If not, you'll have to adjust your preload very slightly to get the washer lined up. But why we have that is so that when we put our jam nut on, which is what this is, even though it looks sort of unusual, that's all it is. It's just a jam nut. It has a cover on it to keep dirt from kind of seeping past the threads there. But once that washer's on there, that'll keep our adjustment from getting thrown off by tightening the jam nut. There we go. So I don't actually think it says anywhere in the service manual exactly how much gear oil we're going to fill this with, but You can basically just fill it up to where it's sort of visible on the, you know, on the worm gear and things like that. You can have it below. I would just say you fill it up basically to where it's a little bit below this gasket. You have to keep in mind when this is installed in the car, it's at like this angle. That's pretty much it. Well, I'll keep filling this up off camera. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe for more like this, leave any questions or comments in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you later.